Well, welcome to everyone on our next lecture on the Kuzari. We are about to start paragraph number 7, that's Zion, and Ma'amar Shlishi. That's the third essay. In the Korubkin version, which is this one, it is page 274. I switched to just reading the Hebrew that's in the Korubkin one, even though it's the older version from Ibn Tibbon, but it's what's on the page. It's just easier than jumping around. So wait, I apologize. Let me silence my phone so we don't have to listen to that. I apologize for that. So anyway, so here we go. So the we're in the middle of a discussion now between the king of the Khazars and the Chaver and the rabbi regarding what makes in Judaism, what's the ideal chassid, the ideal pious person. The bottom line is, what kind of person does the religion of Judaism want us to be and want us to strive to become? So the Chaver gave a very beautiful several page long description of a person who is in full control of his emotional faculties. He's completely in control of he's not ruled by his selfish needs and desires, but he's ruled by his intellect, which helps him decide what is right and what is wrong, and therefore he lives his life accordingly, only enjoying the things that are necessary for him to enjoy, but not over the top, all the way down to the point where he then and he goes through the entire he spoke about prayer and davening. He spoke about self-improvement. He spoke about the influence of the Jewish calendar and the different holidays, how they instill in such a person the proper qualities that a person is supposed to have, at least a Jewish person is supposed to have. And then he ended with a tiny sentence at the bottom of page 273, and at the end of paragraph 5, he said, and with all of this, he then goes ahead and does all of the good things that he's supposed to do. Presumably, that sentence was referring to the mitzvot, right? The commandments, or the things that God wants us to do. So, in other words, until now, the Kuzari is giving us a whole talk about the kind of person, the control of your emotions, ethical things, and so on. But it didn't get down to the nitty gritty. Okay, so now you're this kind of person. Now, what exactly do you do during your life? Like, what activities are you engaged in? What activities are you not engaged in? So the Amar Kuzari, actually it's paragraph 6. I'm sorry, I think I said 7, but it's paragraph 6. The Khazar king then said, Hama'asim hayiduim. When you said he then engages in those proper actions, do you mean the well-known actions? And presumably, what the Khazar king is saying is, we all now know, everyone in the world knows what are the good things to do, right? The basic things that everyone, all of us, pretty much all religions assume are good things. It's good to give charity. It's good to be nice. It's good to be kind. It's good to visit people who are sick. It's good to extend your hospitality to others. Things that everyone assumes are the basic good things. So is that what you're referring to? That now that this person has reached that level, he now engages in the good things, the good stuff? So Amar Chaver. So the Chaver answers him that kind of, sort of, yes, but not totally. Hamasim haminhagim v'hachukim hasichliim heim hayiduim. The civil and rational laws, in other words, the things that everyone knows, the things that people do to be a civil, nice, normal person, they're well known. Period. You don't need me to give you a speech about what's good, right? The basics, right? Aval ha'elohim hanosafim aleim lachol b'umas el chai, right? But the things that are additional, right? The things that are on top of that, the things that one that require the jurisdiction or having been given by God Himself, right? Those sheyachayev the things that He obligates us to do, those are not so well known. Those are not obvious. Those are things we needed God to tell us are the things we're supposed to be doing. So the bottom line is, yes, there are many things, and I did include those. Those were some of the things that the special person we described in the last paragraph is doing, but it's also things that we would not necessarily know to do if not for God's explicit commands. Right? Even the laws that are sichliim, that are logical, that are reasonable, that everyone assumes and knows to be good ones, right? We also don't know them completely. We would know of their existence, but we wouldn't know exactly what the details are. So we would know that we're supposed to be kind, but just how kind are we supposed to be? What are our obligations? And so even in the context of what we generally call ben adam lachaveru, things that are between man and his friend, we don't necessarily know the rules. So let's say the rules of ona, of overcharging someone, for example. So the basic concept that you shouldn't overcharge someone is a basic concept that everyone agrees. But what's considered overcharging? I mean, on the one hand, you're a businessman, you need to make a profit, right? You have to make a living. That's the whole point of business. Otherwise, no one would do business and we wouldn't have anything available. We'd have empty stores to shop in, right? So at what level does it cross the line from a fair profit to ona, to ripping someone off? So these are details that we learn through the religion that we're given. But we know, and some more examples, we know that it's important to be humble, and to act appropriately, control ourselves in a humble way, and it's bad to go live a life seeking only pleasure and so on. And promiscuity among members of the other gender is something that's inappropriate. We know it would be obvious that incest in many of its forms is obviously inappropriate and wrong. And it's appropriate to honor our parents. Similar things. These are logical things that without the Torah we would know and understand on our own are important. But to know the boundaries of these things, right? At what point one is supposed to honor their parents, but what if their parents are asking them to do things that are wrong? Or what if it conflicts with other things? Let's say a person has very severe needs for himself. At what point can he say, I know it's important to help my parents, but at this point I need to do that, so these are the kinds of things that we wouldn't necessarily know, and the Torah helps us define them. But the actions that are given by God that are not logical, we don't understand them at all. Now, those of us that have learned the Rambam remember that almost the entire third section of the Moreh Nevuchim is devoted to explaining why all the mitzvos are completely logical and understandable. So this is where the two of them, this is one of the most famous of all of their disagreements. And this disagreement has repercussions, of course, when you talk to people, how do you approach the mitzvos that are in the Torah that God gives us to do that don't seem to have a logical basis, right? So the Rambam insists that they're all logical. Now, the reasons why it's so important in the Rambam's whole theology that's the case, I'd have to direct you back to all the classes we gave on Moreh Nevuchim. However, because here we're learning, I'm just saying it to give you a contrast, because the Kuzari, Rabbi Yehuda Levi, is coming down strong on the opposite side of that spectrum. That these mitzvos, we have no way, our mind will never understand them. And they're not even close to something we'll ever understand with our minds. They're not logical. They're similar to what when a person hears a doctor, the doctor tells you, take this medicine. And if you're not learned in medicine, it makes no sense. Why in the world would this help this? You don't know, you don't understand, but you trust that the doctor knows what he's talking about. In the same way, when we listen to God, we have no way or capability of understanding what this is, or why we're doing it, but we do it because we are told to. Halotira, and he gives in his example, and it's an interesting example because, again, Rambam explicitly attempts to explain this mitzvah that we're about to learn logically. He refuses to say what Rabbi Yehuda Levi is about to say, and that is about the mitzvah of circumcision. It seems completely opposite from logic, right? And it doesn't make any sense that there doesn't seem to be any benefit. It doesn't make you a better person in any way to do this, right? But it's a mitzvah that's been with us since our inception, since our earliest forefather Avraham. Im kishi ha'inyan ala teva, even though it's tough to do, especially for someone like Avraham. All right, Hu ben Mashana, he's 100 years old. Ben Nafsho Bavanav, he did it himself, and he did it on his children. And it was a sign that he and his descendants would be attached to this spiritual connection that we have to God, that's special, that Rabbi Yehuda Levi has been discussing from the beginning of the book, this special spiritual connection that's inherent to the Jewish people. So that mitzvah absolutely has no logical explanation whatsoever. We do it because it's a sign, but why this? Why not something else? Who knows? But bottom line is, this is what it is. So Amar Kuzari. So that's his classic example. And remember, I said that that's controversial, but this is Rabbi Yehuda Levi's position. And for the most part, I would say that Rabbi Yehuda Levi probably, at least in the Orthodox world today, Rabbi Yehuda Levi probably is a much more dominant position. You'll hear much more often rabbis today speaking about mitzvos that we do only because God told us to do, versus mitzvos that we do only because, no, not only because, but because they make sense, because they're logical, and the difference between the two, which is not the Rambam's position, but it is Rabbi Yehuda Levi's position, which he just articulated, and he's going to articulate more. So let's look at the next paragraph. Ches. Amar Kuzari, says the Kuzari, Be'emes kibaltem haTorah azos koroi. It seems that you guys really did accept the Torah upon yourself the right way, the way it's meant to be. And when he's saying the Torah azos, as opposed to the Toros, the other bodies of law, rules, regulations, etc., that the other religions have, it really seems like you guys accepted the Torah the way it should be. And you did them with wait, I'm sorry, I'm making a mistake. HaTorah is also referring to this particular law. I apologize, right? This particular law, you accepted it the way it's supposed to be, as opposed to the others who might also circumcise, but not the way it should be done. Because when you do it b'hishtadlus gedolah b'makalim b'zdamenileh. You do it with among a nice crowd. You make a big celebration l'shabech to praise God at the time of Lizkar Shirashan, to remember the reasons and purposes, right, and why you do it. And you do it with a special blessing, whereas the other nations that practice this practice, Yishmael Paras, the Persians and the Ishmaelites, right? Tarchuli damos aleichem. They tried to emulate, tried to copy you guys, but v'alabiadu hatzar mibli ha'ana asher yimsena mishu choshev basiba asher. In other words, you guys did it with the right reasons, with the right intentions, while they seem to have accepted that practice, but all they got is the pain, but not the correct purpose. I just turned the page and I just finished paragraph 8. I mean, the difficulty with what the Khazar king just said is that, I mean, if that's the only difference between the Jewish people and those other people, then those other people could just as easily make a party too. So I'm not sure why that's such a fundamental difference, but for some reason, this appeared to the king of the Khazars to demonstrate that the Jews had it right, that we do it right. Amar HaChaver v'chein shar hadimyonim. But then he makes an interesting point. Other people that are copiers, lo yachlu the other things that they tried to copy. Lo yachlu yishmoelu paras listamas aleinu b'davar. They tried to copy lots of other things from our religion. We had lots of things right. They looked at it, they saw it, they thought it looked pretty good, and they tried to copy it, but they didn't quite get it right. They tried to have a day of rest too. to replace the Shabbos that we have, right? But can you possibly compare our Shabbos to their Shabbos? And Rabbi Yehuda Levi's his subtle argument here is that our Shabbos, specifically given with all of the rules that are part of our Shabbos that we have, it's much, much more than just a day that we don't work, or a day that we take a nap or whatever, or even a day that we go to shul. It's so much more than that, and it accomplishes and achieves so much that all of the imposter Sabbaths that the other religions copied from us don't even come close. They're only similar, maybe like the similarity of a statue to a real human being. I mean, they might have some similarities. They both have arms and legs, but I mean, no one would say that they're really similar. So the same thing with the Shabbos that they've taken upon themselves. Paragraph 10. I'm on page 276. And in this one, we have, coming from the Khazar king, an observation that's really a timeless observation, and one that many people have made and understood. That he really kind of expresses the secret to Jewish survival. How is it that we haven't assimilated into all the other nations? Why is it that we've made it through all of this time intact? And the king of the Khazars is going to observe that it is because of Shabbos and the other holidays to a lesser degree, but Shabbos in a stronger way. So let's hear how he says it. Amar Kuzari, says the Khazar king, Kvar chashavti b'inyanechem. I've already been thinking a bunch about what's going on here, and about how you guys are living. And I've seen sheyesh le'elohim sod b'hashirchem. God has some sort of a secret plan, right? That he leaves you around. I mean, this is what perplexes non-Jews, Gentiles. It perplexes Jews too over the years. How could it be that we're still around? Especially in the time of that this story is taking place. The Jews have no land, no nation. They have no army. They have no strength. They're scattered everywhere. The big, powerful countries are all persecuting them, and so on and so forth. Like, how is it that you still make it? All right, how do you still survive? When one looks into the Jewish soul, think about this question on our own. How is it that we made it through all of that? And it's almost impossible to imagine we could have made it through without Shabbos. If we didn't have Shabbos as an opportunity, right, for all, these are my own words, not the Khazar King's words. We'll read his in a minute. A time when we get together as a community and we talk to our friends and colleagues about who we are as a people, about what's important to us, the Torah values that are important to us, study Torah together, learn the different mitzvot, learn how we're supposed to live as Jews, gives us an opportunity to sit with our family, not thinking and talking about all the mundane things that happen all the time. And this is what keeps us connected. This is what keeps us attached. And if you're a Jew from anywhere and you go to anywhere, you can spend a Shabbos and find familiar company, doing familiar things together with the goal of becoming closer together and becoming closer to God. So, and he says this like this: Vishahu what God was trying to preserve you. So how did he do that? He gave you the mitzvah of Shabbos, v'hamoadim, and the holidays. Mehagadol shebasibos pahashir te'archem. I'm sorry, my light isn't thick. Okay, ta'archem v'hadarchem. He gave it to you because he wanted for you to keep your special beauty, your special shine. Right? The nations were scattering you all over the place. Right? They would have taken you all for slaves and assimilated you. Everybody knows you guys are smart, right? And everybody knows you guys are educated, right? So they would have taken you and taken advantage of you and assimilated you into their cultures and used you as their servants. They would have made you their generals and officers in their armies, right? And how is it that this assimilation didn't happen? How is it that the other countries didn't take advantage of you and bring you into their nations and make you one of them? Right? Lule ele ha'itim. It's only because of those special times sha'atem shomim rosa that you're to take so much care and concern about these special times, right? Hashmira hazos hama'ula mepnei she'hem me'es halakim ulilos chazakos, because these are the times, right, that you keep and observe in this special way, because these are given to you by God, and they are given to you for such good reasons. The purpose of these is time for you to remember the creation. In other words, remember that there's a creator, there's a greater purpose to this all, there's a greater purpose to our lives. It's not just to make money so I have food to eat, and so that I can go tomorrow and make money again so that I have food to eat for dinner, and on and on and on, this never-ending cycle. But if there's a creator, there's a purpose, there's a reason. And also remembering that our exodus from Egypt, which is just so crucially important to our special relationship with God that saved us from slavery in order to give us a special mission. And this is what we're supposed to remind ourselves on Shabbos and all of the holidays. And what was that mission? And how do we fulfill that mission? By fulfilling the Torah, because it's Zecher L'Matan Torah. These holidays are for the remembering the giving of the Torah. Of course, we know that the holiday of Shavuot is coming up in a couple of weeks. These are all godly ideas, spiritual ideas. And you're very carefully keep and guard these things, which is clearly why you never were able, no one was ever able to assimilate you. And if not for them, right? Were it not for these things, right? None of them would even be wearing clean clothing. You would never have any gatherings together to remember your Torah, because you'd have been so depressed and so downtrodden. Because you're exiled, you lost all of your pride. So if you take another nation whose pride is a pride, we have the greatest country in the world, and we love our land, the Mother Earth, or the blood of the soil, or whatever the people say, the nationalists say, right? And then someone takes you away from that soil. We're proud of all of our national monuments and all of our big buildings and this and that, or our economic achievements, our powerful army. And then, a war happens, a famine happens, you lose, and an exile happens, you lose the land, you lose all those symbols, you lose the wealth, you lose the army, it's all gone. What's left? Nothing. You're just a downtrodden nobody that happened to come once from a place which once was great. So in the end, you assimilate, you're downtrodden, but you don't have that, because no matter what happens, you still have the Shabbos, you still have Pesach, you still have Sukkot, you still have the Torah, you still remember there's a creator, you still remember these things. If not for these things, you wouldn't have that special day in your life where you can actually feel sweetness and remember these beautiful relationships that you have, no matter what, no matter where you are, no matter how bad your situation is. Right now, you have at least 1/6 of your days are restful. Now, in modern mathematics, we would call it 1/7, but in the mathematics of the time, especially of Rabbi Halevi, there's two ways of calling fractions. There's what's called, in the Gemara calls it milagav u milabar. This wouldn't fly in mathematics today, so I wouldn't recommend you use this. But so a sixth of something milagav, right, means from the inside, which is what we would call today 1/6. So if you have a whole and divide it in 6 parts, 1/6 of that whole, that's milagav, from the inside, so to speak. A sixth milabar means a sixth from the outside. That means you take a whole, divide it in 6 parts, then you take a piece equal to that part, in addition to it, that's a sixth. So in other words, it's really what we would call a 7th. So I don't want you to think that Rabbi Halevi didn't know math. He did know math. He just had a different way of doing math than we have it today. That's why he calls Shabbos 1/6 of your life is spent in restfulness, right? And the kings and the officers and the nations and the laws, they can't touch it. They can't take it away from you, right? I'm sorry, not that they can't take it away from you, but even they never have it. Even the powerful people, the kings, don't have that opportunity, right? So here we have a king saying this, right? As a king, without Judaism, without Shabbos, I would go on every day would be like the day before. I would never have that opportunity, right? Even on the day I might take a break, I still can't relax. I still have my economic minister telling me that there was a problem here with the economy, and my war minister telling me that there's a tax in the South, and I have my other guy telling me that I can't relax. I never have a time, right? Even on those days, right? They still have to work and go places. Right? They'd be going around, they'd be exhausted. They never actually fully achieve rest. Were it not for all of these days, Shabbos most importantly, but also all of the holidays, all your efforts would end up being for others. You'd end up working and you'd end up getting taxed, you'd end up becoming servants. Right? You would have had your time would have been completely taken advantage of by others. Right? This special efforts that you make to keep Shabbos and to keep the holidays helps you not just in Olam Haba in the future world, but it also helps you practically in this world. It keeps you independent. It keeps your people whole. Because you are doing them for the purpose of serving God and nothing else. So this is really a beautiful explanation and about the beauty and the specialness of Shabbos and why something like Shabbos really keeps, and we find when people let go of Shabbos, right? That's the first and biggest and most important step on the path towards assimilation. It may not happen that day, it may not happen that week, but it happens in another generation or the generation after that. Once you lose an attachment to Shabbos, and the way to regain that is to come back to Shabbos. And this is something that's been proven time and again throughout history. I'm going to stop just for a minute to receive comments, questions, and observations if anyone has anything they want to add.
I just wanted to ask if maybe he's including also Yantiv and Rosh Chodesh in that calculation.
Well, he is. Well, first of all, he did mention and the other holidays. So secondary to Shabbos being the most important, but the other holidays too. But also the Chaver in what we did last week when he was talking about the spiritual renewal and the self improvement that a chassid, that a pious person goes through. He described the cycle of Shabbos, the cycle of each month of Rosh Chodesh, the cycle. So presumably he means all of it, all of these times that we plug ourselves back into God, so to speak.
And am I correct that Rosh Chodesh, that Shabbos, according to Rabbi Yehuda Levi, is more important than Yom Kippur? I think there was some kind of, I think it was Ramchal. I mean, they're not contemporaries, but I think Ramchal said that Yom Kippur and Rabbi Yehuda Levi in this context claims that Shabbat is more important.
There may be other from this. I mean, he doesn't mention Yom Kippur here. He mentioned fasting and about fasting, right? But he didn't specifically specify Yom Kippur. Oh no, he did. Of course, he did. He talked about Yom Kippur before.
Yeah, but what I think I remember, like this is a long time ago. What I think is that Rav Turiel told us that because Rabbi Yehuda Levi pointed out that when Shabbat and Yom Kippur coincide, the fact that you fast is proof that Shabbat is more important because we're not allowed to fast on Shabbat, but we only do it because it happens to be the 10th of Tishrei. And like
Okay.
that, I think that was his context of how
it may.
he said it like that.
No, it could very well be. I don't remember that statement, but maybe if we may get to it, I just don't remember. But that it sounds interesting and it certainly fits, but I don't remember that specific statement.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
I've never been to a Muslim country, but I know that, of course, Fridays is their Sabbath. Do they work on Sabbath? Do they treat it? I always thought that was sort of equivalent in the Muslim world than the way Jews treat it.
I honestly don't know. I don't know. If someone here knows, please enlighten me.
So in Israel, well, Mitzvot, the Ministry of Religious Affairs, actually supports mosques, churches, and synagogues. So they have a longer and more central prayer on Friday, but they are allowed to work. There is no prohibition of labor.
Thank you.
Okay, and I can't speak for all Christians, but there is such a thing as not working on Sunday. But certainly, most of us see in a Christian country, most people are. They may not. Some people might go to work, some people not. I mean, Sunday is sort of what a day of rest here. I don't, you guys know just as much as I do about
the Christians. Well, if you go back to the time when I was young, they had what were called the blue laws. I don't know where the blue laws came from, but what it meant was you couldn't open an establishment on Sunday, so that no one worked on Sunday, period, whether you were Christian, Jewish, or whatever. The law said you couldn't work on Sunday. So most Christians did observe a day of no work. Now, they did drive a car, they did other things, obviously, that we don't do on our Shabbat, but they didn't work. Now, that's changed in modern society, but at one time in America, that's the way it was.
Yeah, okay.
So just to mention that. The other thing I want to mention is that the other thing that is not brought out, but I think is a major part of why we didn't assimilate, besides Shabbat and the holidays and being together, was what drove us together. And that in many of those countries and in many times, even up until today, anti-Semitism and not being allowed to enter the general society as an equal has pretty much made it where Jews hung out together even in America in olden times and earlier times. And now that things are much more free, assimilation is a real problem. So, people don't, that's another thing he didn't mention, but I think is an important factor in why we didn't assimilate, because we were forced we were not allowed to enter society, basically.
Yeah. Well, I you're definitely right there. I mean, and there's probably a lot of other factors if we talk for a while, that involved in how we managed to not assimilate in all those generations, but and that's an important observation. But it in the context of our discussion here, which is of being a pious person and what Judaism demands of us, it's an interesting observation to come from the mouth of the king of the Khazars, right? As opposed to the Jewish person, as an outsider looking in, he sees our strength, and he sees our strength as kind of embodied by Shabbos, which is interesting. But yes, absolutely. Why we didn't assimilate, there are a lot other more aspects to that. So let's see number 11. So the Chaver comes ahead and answers. And this is going to be a little bit lengthy. I don't know if we'll have a chance to finish it tonight, but I'm just looking to see how. There's no way we'll finish it tonight, but we'll definitely get into it. So Amar Chaver. So the Chaver responds and says as follows. So remember, he set up, just to get back into the swing of things here. Remember, he set up a situation, right, where he described the pious person. He described how he builds his spiritual life. He's responding to the Khazar king's observation of the importance of Shabbos, and he set us up by telling us that there's two different types of mitzvot. There's those things that are logical and sensible that anyone would understand, and generally that corresponds to Ben Adam Lachavero, between man and his friend, and other human beings, and then there's the mitzvot that are given to us directly by God, So now he's going to go a little bit more into these mitzvot and living a life of doing, right? So we're leaving, not leaving the realm, but we've just laid a foundation of a person who's in control, who's doing what he's supposed to do, both because it makes sense and because God told him to do so, and he's using those mitzvot in order to strengthen his relationship with God. So Amar Chaver. So the Chaver says, Hechazid, right? This chassid, this pious person that we've been talking about, nizhar b'mitzvas ela hadvar malakim. He's very careful to keep all of these things that are the divine mitzvot, the mitzvot that are given by God. Rotze lomar, meaning those things, hamila v'ashabas v'hamoadim v'torosam hamitzuvim me'es alakim. The mitzvot of the circumcision, of Sabbath, and the holidays, and all of their laws that pertain to them, which were commanded by God. Uli shamer min ha'arayos, and to be careful from forbidden sexual relationships. V'hakilayim, and the mixture of things, but of different plants and clothing, meaning wool and linen, uvabegadim, uvachayim, and mixtures of living animals, uvashmita, and keeping the laws of shmita, uvayovel. And he's most of this discussion, he's going to be making the assumption of the time of the Beis Hamikdash, the time of the temple, because he's going to mention a lot of those practices too. Uli shamer me'avodah zara, and he's being careful from from staying away from idol worship, umashenit or anything that's related to it, right? Uli shamer midirosh yidias hanelam mizulasi hanevua, and he stays away from searching for information, for secret information, for hidden information through magical and divining type ways that other than actual prophecy, right? Or mitzvot, or the things that were allowed. In other words, when one would ask the Kohen Gadol, who would consult the Urim V'Tumim in his breastplate, or trustworthy dreams, reliable dreams. But he wouldn't listen to someone who's a diviner, a charmer, of some other sort. Exactly how he would define chalomot ne'emonim, trustworthy dreams, and exactly what would be considered a legitimate prophecy, he's not dealing with here. But he's drawing a line here between, not living our lives based on trying to find out the future or find out what our fortunes are from random fortune tellers and the like. And to stay away, in other words, during forbidden times from his spouse, if she's a nida, or in the time of zivos, which nowadays we don't differentiate halachically between the two. Any bleeding, we just call her Anita, although sometimes she's really Anita, sometimes she's Azava. That's beyond the scope of this conversation. But regardless, he stays away. And staying away from eating animals that aren't kosher, not just eating it, but even touching it. And remember, he's referring now, and you'll see what I mean. He already talked about Shemitah and Yovel, so he's already talking about a person who's living in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, when he can consult the Urim V'Tumim, for example. So some of this is applicable to today, and some of it is not, right? But either way, this is the ideal life, right? Ulishamer mehadam, and stay away from consuming blood. V'achelev, and the chelev are the fats of the animal. There are certain fats that are forbidden, because those are the portions that are supposed to be brought on the mizbeach, on the altar. Ushmiras mashu chayav bo al kol avera b'shogig umezim mikarban. And he's always careful to fulfill any obligations that are incurred because of sins he may have done, either inadvertently or purposefully, right? Zulas mashu chayav bo mipidyon b'chor v'abikurim, other than aside from, this is better translated, aside from the things that he's obligated to bringing when he's poda, is the firstborn animals, v'abikurim, the firstborn fruits, v'alkol leida shetia l'karban, and every birth, meaning every woman who gives birth, who then has obligated to bring a carbon, and regarding him, if he becomes tamei to the impurity of zivos or tzaras, or if he becomes tamei, becomes impure through tzaras or leprosy, or whatever you want to call that, carbon mincha, all the different offerings whether animal or flower offerings that he's supposed to bring. Vilade mashu chayav bo mimasar rishon v'sheni umasar ani v'ara'ayon shalosh mashana, from bringing the first tithe and the second tithe and the tithe that one gives to the poor, and coming to the Beit Hamikdash 3 times a year on Pesach, Pesach, and the special carbon that's brought on Pesach, V'Torosav, and all of its applicable laws, Shu Karban Hashem, which is a sacrifice to God. Chayav bo kol ezrach b'Yisrael, and every citizen of Israel is obligated via sukkah and doing the mitzvah of sukkah and lulav, a shofar. So like he's careful when he needs to use the vessels within which these holy offerings are being handled. He makes sure to do it in the proper state. Whatever holiness and special states of purity he needs to maintain in order to handle these things. And he makes sure to leave a corner of his field for the poor via arla, and not consuming a tree and the fruits of a tree the first few years of kodesh hilulim, and bringing the special fruits to on the 4th year to Jerusalem. And the general rule of all of this is that he's going to do everything he can, everything in his ability to keep the things that are the laws that are given by God. So pretty much all of the things he mentioned until now, with some exceptions, and I'll talk about them in a second, are things that are God-given mitzvot, things that aren't necessarily logical. Now, some of them have elements of logic in it. So for example, he mentioned payah, leaving a corner of your field for the poor. So it's a good example because remember he said that everyone agrees that giving food to the poor, right, is a good deed. You don't have to be a Jew, you don't have to read the Torah to realize that that's a good thing to do, right? We all understand intuitively that that's good. But we wouldn't necessarily have come up with this specific law. So remember he said, God told us that you're supposed to do good, you're supposed to give to the poor, and I'm mandating you that certain things you keep in order to make sure you do it right. So leave a corner of your field for the poor, and that's part of one of the rules. That's both it's part God given and part human, what any human would have come up on his or her own. These and all similar things. Oh, I skipped 2 lines. All of the various vows that one might make, and the peace offerings, the things that people bring, to the mizbeach in order to celebrate with their families, because the shlamim that's why they're called peace offerings, because the owner and his family and his friends eat it together. If he accepts upon himself to be a nazir. And most of these require a Kohen to do them, and these are the things that I talked about when I mentioned when I said that the laws given to us by God. But those laws which are general customs that the whole world understands and knows to be reasonable are as follows: Kimo, like lo sirtzach, do not murder; lo tinaf, do not commit adultery; lo tignov, don't steal; lo sana bereacha. And obviously, he's listing, several well-known of the 10 statements. Lo tana bereacha, don't bear false witness against others. Kibbut avaim, honoring your father and mother. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, loving your friend like yourself. V'ahavta mesager, loving the newcomer, the convert, the migrant. V'lo sechachashu, don't cheat. So don't lie to each other. Stay away from interest. Stay away from ripping someone off in business. And be careful to keep proper measures. Avnei tzedek, efa tzedek, vin tzedek, so on. Proper measures when doing business. Azivas haleket, leaving the stalks that have fallen to the ground. V'holelos, v'aporos, v'apeos, v'adomeles, are those things that we're supposed to leave for the poor. So these are the laws that are logical, reasonable, that everyone would understand. And then, but he's going to be dividing those into 2 categories. The category he just mentioned are the ones that are minhagios, that are ones that are necessary for being a normal, nice person in the way we act and conduct ourselves among our fellow, right? But there are also mitzvot that are logical, that aren't necessarily things that go between us and our fellow. So remember, he lived in a time where the debates, the theological debates, were generally about whose God is the right one. Us as Christians, us as Muslims, us as Jews, and everyone arguing about their own theology. The argument wasn't really that much anymore about whether or not God existed, right? But they might argue about the nature of God. So some of the philosophers will say, yeah, that God exists, but he always existed. It was never, the world always existed. Those would be the Aristotelians, which would be the other group involved in those days. They didn't really have, at this time, the atheists who thought that God doesn't exist at all. But nowadays, we would have to add them into the picture. But regardless, that's why he's about to say, Vatoros hanafshios, but there's also laws that are relevant. Literally, nafshios means the soul, but he means that are not necessarily b'nanam l'chavero. They're not necessarily laws that govern how we act towards our friend, but they're still logical. They're still things that we would know, even if we didn't have the Torah. So those laws, like Anochi Hashem Lekecha, I am Hashem your God, that there's no such thing as other gods. And you shouldn't abuse God by using his name in vain. With the addition of the things that are added in the Torah of our Torah, which extends from those rules were accepted by pretty much everyone then. But then we go, as in the Jewish religion, a little bit farther and add that God knows matzpune b'nei Adam, that God knows what's going on in our hearts and our souls, what we do in secret and private. Kol sheken masayim v'devarim, and he certainly knows what we do and what we speak. V'shu gomel al tov, and he rewards for good. V'al ramayim, and punishes the bad. And that God's eyes, so to speak, are searching out the entire land. So those are three categories of mitzvos: the logical ones that have to do with the way we behave towards others, the ones that are not necessarily logical, they're just mitzvos that God gives us, and the ones that are logical but don't have anything to do with necessarily with how we treat others. Fine. So these are all the things, the actions that this person does, right? This person doesn't do anything. He doesn't involve himself in anything. He doesn't think about things or speak about things until unless in other words, he's constantly thinking that someone is watching. Right? That everything he does, he's doing with the understanding that God is watching. So he has to do it right. Upoktos olav, and they're keeping account. Kol mu'uvas medibur maseo, everything that's wrong about what he does and what he says. V'holech v'yoshev ki yarei v'chared, and he goes through his entire life. He walks and he sits and he stands like someone who's always afraid. Hamisbayesh mimasav litim, is constantly embarrassed about what he's doing. If you're walking in the street and you know that everybody's watching you, you're always worried. Am I walking the right way? Am I looked the right way? Am I dressed the right way? Am I saying the right words? So on and so forth. Such a person goes through life that way. Kasheru sameach v'sasan, when he's happy, right? When he's doing things that it's appropriate for godly worship, then he's very happy because he's doing the right thing. And he remembers this even when it's hard, when the work becomes difficult and doing the right thing is tough. It's easier for him because he enjoys what he's doing, because he realizes that he's doing what God wants him to do. And the general rule is he believes and he accepts that which it states. In the famous dictum in the Mishnah and Avot, tishtakal b'shlosha dvarim, look at three things, ve'ena tabali de'avera, and you will never come to sin. Dam malamala mimcha, remember what is above you. Ayin roa, there's an eye that sees. Ozen shamas, there's an ear that listens. V'chol ma'asecha b'sefer nechtav, and everything that you do is being written down in a book. V'yireh shemash amar David hatana hanemana, and he is always he sees and he knows and remembers that which David said in such a good argument when he said, Hanota ozen al yishma, the person who planted ears, put ears on our heads, you think he can't hear? He's the one that created the concept of hearing. Of course he could hear. If he's the one who created eyes, surely he sees, right? God, you checked me out and you know what the deal is with me. I'm going to stop here because we leave us a few minutes to talk. And even though we're in the middle, just make a little mark here so I don't forget where we stopped. But we'll go next time. But there's a lot here to say. I want to say one thing before I open the floor. It's something that's always meant a lot to me. When I learned this Mishnah, well, the simple meaning of the Mishnah that Rabbi Yehuda Levi just quoted, and the simple understanding of the point he's trying to make is that if we remember all the time that God is watching us, then we'll be afraid, right? We'll be scared, and we'll know that God is watching, so we can't get away with whatever it is we might want to get away with, and we'll always be careful to do the right thing, and that is that's clearly true, right? That if someone remembers those things. But when I learned that Mishnah a long time ago, once it hit me something that was totally the opposite. Because there's something about that idea that just always bothered me a little. Like, do I need to live my life always afraid and scared? You know, I'm going to get struck by lightning if I do this. Somebody's watching. It's like the idea of motivating me in fear. And it was in a time when I was, being criticized for something, and people think this or that or whatever it is that they think about me or what I did or didn't do and so on, and inside I know that the only one who really knows is God, right? And God being the one who really knows, and he's being the only one that really matters, because he's the only one that really controls where things can go. So when I read this Mishnah at that time in my life, I looked at it and I thought, this is such a beautiful idea. It is so encouraging to think that everyone else around you, everyone makes assumptions, and they could think all kinds of things, good or bad, very often bad. But God, when he sees something that you or I do, he knows everything. He knows the entire background. He knows what our motivations were. He knows what our challenges were. He knows what our difficulties were. He knows the influences that happened that even ourselves we don't know about. He knows what happened in our childhood. He knows whatever suffering we went through. He knows whatever challenges we had to meet, right? And such a person, Eina Tabali de Avera, because it's such a tremendous feeling of love. It's not just fear, but it's love. When you realize, who is it that really, really, really understands what really happened and why you did what you did, or why you didn't do what you didn't do, or so on. The only one is God. He's the only one that really knows. And human beings, no matter how much technology we have, we could never know for every single thing that influenced a person. Even if you have it caught on videotape, you still don't know what happened the minute before the videotape, what happened the minute after the videotape, and you don't know what happened, the entire life that led up to that few moments of on the video that you see. Like, what happened an hour before? What happened a day before? What happened a week before? We can try to reconstruct these things, but the only one who really knows it is God. So if we put ourselves in front of him as a true judge, you look at this in a very different way. So I just wanted to bring that point, and now I'll open the floor, and I see there's already one hand up. So Jeffrey, go ahead.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I attended an Torah course, I don't know, 30 years ago. And I remember, and it's somewhat contrary to the point you're raising, that if God is like a policeman in your backseat of your car, then what kind of life can you expect to live? That the secret here is there's not an all-seeing, all-hearing entity in the backseat of your car. It's a more, if you will, subtle relationship where you're expected to internalize, but there's no, if you will, external force always watching, always listening. And that at least gave me some.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if God wasn't just the police, because the policeman is the guy who gives you a ticket when you speed, right? And he or takes you to jail, if God forbid you did something a lot worse than speeding, right? But what if it wasn't a policeman in your backseat, but it was a father, a mother, your teachers, your friends, the bully who bullied you when you were in second grade, your psychologist, your doctor, your lawyer, your wife, your ex-wife, the girlfriend that you didn't date, the one you wanted to, the your kids, your kids' kids, and all of them, right?
In the back.
But an entity that knows everything, and they know your own psychological issues, they know your illnesses, they know your weaknesses, they know your strengths, they know your skills, they know your lack of skills, they know the whole shebang. So it's that when someone knows that even more than you and I know about ourselves, right? That is what, and that entity is not a person, really understands you, more than anything else in the whole world.
But what if free will is defined as not having anyone in the back seat, and certainly not God?
That's an interesting observation. Free will, we'll have to, we can go, we did have numerous discussions in our Rambam class, but free will, that's what you're opening up a whole new can.
Okay, I'll hold off.
All right, Yosef, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I just can't believe how timely this is. Yesterday, our granddaughter was accused by the principal of calling another kid fat, and we believe that she didn't. But apparently, the principal has it on video, but the video doesn't have audio, and so our daughter-in-law didn't even know that there are cameras in the hallways. Like, this is so timely because there is a video, and even if you could read lips, which I don't, like, it's just incredible. But even to Jeff's comment, it's even if it is the free choice. I think Rav Shmuel a few weeks ago talked about that. He just said that it's like you could somehow jump into the future just tomorrow and know what the result of the football or baseball or whatever game it was. And then the players still have a choice of what they're going to do or not do, but you already know the result. And that was his parable about the difference between knowing and choosing. That Hashem just knows the result because Hashem is above time. But it doesn't mean that we still don't have a free choice to completely do it. So
that is definitely one of the important approaches to that very big question. I don't want to touch the hot rod of Yediyah and Bechira right now. I mean, it's a very important topic, but it's not one that we're in tonight. And it seems like now the second person is trying to draw us into it, but I don't know.
No, I was just commenting because it refers to. I don't think that our granddaughter would ever even choose to use that word because she's very careful, and so
it's interesting because you say that because you have an intimate knowledge of her, presumably more than the principal does, right? Now the principal has a little bit more knowledge of her than I do, right? I don't even know anything about her other than that she's your granddaughter. But imagine God, right? Who knows more than anyone about her and about what happened. To stand in front of that kind of judge, to me, is comforting. To know that the judge that's going to judge me is the one that really, really knows what really happened and really, really knows what my motivations were or weren't, and really, really understands the influences and so on. That's the kind of judge that I would want to sit in front of.
Yeah, so that's interesting because what he describes is sort of like the Big Brother in 1984. He's watching you, and he'll if you make a move, it's over. And that's not really the way. I mean, I like the way you describe that he understands. He puts everything together like a real judge would, and makes a decision. And that's more comforting than thinking, I've got to do this right because he's watching. If I don't, zap, I've got a problem. So I like that better than the 1984 version of what God would be. So
I mean, I liked it too very much.
That's my take on it.
All right. Well, if anyone else has anything to say, please speak up now or wait till next week or send me an email. But otherwise, it was a pleasure learning with everyone tonight. I look forward to next week, Kimir Hashem, same time, same place. And we'll keep on rolling. Have a wonderful evening.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Good night. Thanks, Saul.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you, Saul.